Manager, I think we're ready to start. I believe this is going to be recorded for people at home who like to watch this on YouTube. So I don't know how that works exactly, but I think we're going to be recorded this morning. So welcome to the viewers on YouTube. Mr. Manager, this is your meeting, I believe, so I'm just going to turn it over to you.
It is. Welcome, everybody. Commissioners, thank you for allowing us to come back in front of you. If you remember, after the offsite we had of the Public Safety Center, we discussed compensation, and but it's it's kind of all one big nested strategy. As you know, when I sent you my 90-day letter, this is one of my points in my 90-day letter where I wanted to talk about compensation, just because I see it as a real issue and something that needs to be addressed. And it wasn't anything new. As you know and have read up until this point, the Evergreen study that was done a couple of years ago, based off the same concerns, same understanding of where we were. It's still a concern, and it's still a concern for me, and something that I felt I needed to address in my 90-day letter, and I also wanted to put in front of you at the offsite. Well, as a result of that offsite, we suggested a workshop where you could get more information instead of really tying down the workshop with 30 or 40 slides. So now we have that opportunity, and I'm going to let Eileen lead the discussion. We sent you the slides. We sent you some information so you could kind of look at it and get your questions ready, which I know Eileen can answer, and my esteemed colleagues up here in front of the House Armed Services Committee. But I think this is a good discussion. I think it's good also that it is being taped. I think it's important for the employees to know that you are concerned about it, and that you have their best interests in heart, which I know each one of you do. And these are always good discussions to have to show that they are number one in our eyes.
If you don't mind, I would like to just say this is a fairly long presentation, so I would like to give the commissioners opportunities to interrupt and to interject questions throughout this, but if you feel like the answer is on a subsequent slide, you're welcome to say,
sure.
Well, I'll be getting to that very question here in just a few minutes, and we'll be able to push those answers off. That's fine. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to be able to invite the commissioners as we go forward to be recognized and answer or ask questions and really deal with things as we go through this long presentation, because it is a lot of information, and I really hate to ask 30 questions at the end rather than 30 questions throughout. So if that's okay with you.
Will it be the same process where they'll notify you that they have a question?
Yeah, I've got rights to recognize the commissioners. We'll just do this like a regular board meeting if
Perfect.
It's okay.
That's fine.
So with that, this is your meeting now, Eileen, so thank you for being here for the presentation. Looking forward to what you have to present.
I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you with this information. I am Eileen McNichol, and I'm your Human Resources Director. And today, what I want to talk with you about is I want to provide you some information, some historic review of past pay practices, information on the Evergreen Study's recommendations and the results, some current data, and then some of the current challenges that we're facing. And then I would also like to request your guidance for our compensation philosophy and for our future going forward. One of the things I want to point out is that our employee experience, or any employee experience, is comprised generally of four things: pay, benefits, work environment, and employee development. And these four things are regarded as total rewards. That's how I've organized HR, and that's what we do with those four areas to help guide a positive employee experience through total rewards. Now today, the main thing that we'll be talking about is pay. But I wanted you to have it in this context because this is the rationale and the functionality of how we handle HR with the concept of the employee experience. We do have a wage and salary policy, and it provides us a better understanding of how we administer our salaries and our pay practices. It provides clarification on definitions, but it does not provide a pay philosophy. It merely says it's the policy of Sedgwick County to pay employees for their value and assigned responsibilities. So as we go through this, I'd like to have, the opportunity to get some feedback from you gentlemen as to what else you would like for our policy to address, if you would like to have some philosophy put in there. Because when you talk about pay philosophy, the purpose for that is to identify what we see as our strategic approach to our pay and to our total compensation. It also allows people to get an understanding of how we value them, where we see that they could go, and it allows us to attract people. It also motivates people to do a better job. They understand what it takes to move forward. And it also helps us retain key talent because they understand what we value and how we'll compensate people. And it helps reward high-performing employees. It also identifies how we're going to position ourselves to the market, how competitive we want to be regarding base pay, variable compensation, and then again that total compensation, in conjunction with economic conditions, our competition, and our ability to pay. So I want to just discuss the main pay types. There are step increases, and this is where all employees at the same step in the same grade receive the same compensation. It provides consistency, but there's no differentiation between outstanding employees and average employees. The next type is a cost of living adjustment, or a COLA. This helps the organization keep pay consistent with inflation so that employees don't lose buying power. And then there's merit pay. This is pay that is based upon an employee's value. An example of that is pay for performance, which is the type that we use. And then there's a lump sum, which is a one-time payment that does not compound salary. I wanted to provide some history to the type of pay types that we've used. From 1998 to 2009, we used step increases and COLAs. I won't read all the numbers there, but you'll see the years that go with the COLAs from 1998 to 2004. We did our last COLA in 2004. Along with those, we also had 3% steps each year. So that's what we did for our pay from 1998 to 2009. In 2005, we started making some pay adjustments, and this is historic data that I have. I'm sure we did it before that, but this is the information that I had historically. In 2006, we started implementing the pay for performance process. We started phasing that in, and we did 4% pay pools in 2007, 2008. And then 2009, we had a full implementation of the pay for performance program with a 4% pay pool. And that was prior to the Evergreen study. Prior to the Evergreen study, the last pay structure adjustment was of 2%, and that was done in 2009.
Let me interrupt you for just a moment,
Sure.
please. Let's go over this just a little more clearly
Sure.
for myself. So in 1998, we had a 2% COLA that's tied to inflation. That was because of inflation. Is that considered on top of that, there was a 3%
Step. Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's 5% total that year. Okay. All right, please continue.
Okay. In 2010, there was a 2% flat increase for people who had salaries less than $75,000. For people who were paid more than $75,000, there was no pay increase. In 2011, there was a pay pool of 2%. In 2012, there was a pay freeze. In 2013, the pay pool was 2.5%, as was in 2014. And then last year, our pay pool was 1.75%. And we adjusted our pay structure in 2014 with the Evergreen study, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The Evergreen study, we received the services of Evergreen Solutions, and they provided a market survey. They also conducted many employee meetings, and this was done from 2013 to 2014. They benchmarked 72 of our job classifications. And from that work that they did, the findings for our pay plan from the market survey, on average, we were 4.5% below the market minimum, and on average, 6.7% below the market midpoint, and on average, 8.8% below the market maximum. Our peers consisted of, we had 22 peers in that study that they did, and they were selected for geographic, demographic, and market conditions. It was a cross-section of our competitive and comparable labor markets. In the focus groups that they conducted, these were the findings, the main findings that they had. There was a strong desire of the employees to receive increases to their pay. They were discontent with the concept of just a cost of living adjustment, not so much that it was a specific COLA, but they felt that the increases were small, comparable to a COLA. They would like to see the program funded on a regular basis. They would like to have more pay for tuition reimbursement and certification, license, and education attainment. They felt that the county is a good place to work. They like the organizational commitment to serve the public. They're satisfied with the benefits, and they appreciate the quality of the co-workers and work environment that they have. That was the main feedback from the focus groups. What resulted from their efforts was a pay plan structure that took our 4 pay plans and consolidated them into one, not including the fire union step plan. This is just an example of grade 120, where you've got the minimum, the market midpoint, and the maximum. So all of our pay grades are structured in a way where there's a minimum, midpoint, and a maximum. And this is just an example of what it looks like. The way the pay plan was structured was we expanded our range, our pay range, from the various types that we had with the 4 into a 50% pay range. And they also put 5% pay progressions between the pay grades. The way they adjusted the pay structure was they took the lowest level minimum and increased that by 3.35% and then put 5% between the pay grades from there. As I said, they expanded our pay range to 50%. It had been around 46 for the general plan and smaller for some of the other ones. So what this did was that it increased the average midpoints because we went from 4 pay plans to 1, and it expanded our maximum. So it adjusted our minimum a little bit. It moved our midpoint out for the majority for all the plans, and then it also moved out our maximum more because they expanded it out to 50%. We also brought employees to the new minimum of the range. That impacted 801 employees at a cost of $1.6 million. And then we also provided a 1.26% salary adjustment for everyone else, and that was based on the CPI. And that cost $1.4 million almost. Now the challenge and the result of this is it did put our midpoint closer to market, which is great. The challenge is that the 1.26% increase put our employees further away from being paid at market because the market moved further than 1.26 for the employees. This exacerbated our compression and our grade compression problem, which I'll explain more in a moment.
Hold on just for a moment. Commissioner Peter John?
Mm-hmm. Could I get a clarification, Eileen,
Sure.
in terms of when you used the figure, brought employees to the new minimum range and at a cost of a little less than $1.6 million, is that included within the, I think it was 2.5% pay pool, or is that in addition to, for 2014, it was in the slide for 2011?
That was in addition to. That was a budgeted amount that the board had to work with this structure adjustment.
Okay, so with the 1.26 salary adjustment that's below that of almost 1.4 million, was that part of the 2.5 or in addition
No.
to 2?
No, that would be in addition to. You're right.
So if we added those 2 in, we would have had a 2014 increase that would have been significantly above as part of the Evergreen study. So I looking at those 2 numbers, if those are separate, I mean, it's a little bit less than $3 million in addition to the 2.5% pay pool. But that would be what was increased in 2014 with Evergreen and the pay pool. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, there's you can look at it a number of ways. There are the increases that went into effect in January of 2014, and then there were the increases that happened in July. You can look at it that way. Because that would have been the increases from 2013. I mean, the pay pool from 2013, if it happened in January of 2014.
Well, I was going to say, we had 2.5% in 2013 too,
Correct.
and that's separate
Correct.
also. Okay. I think I'm squared away. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner. And one more question for myself.
Sure.
So when you moved the minimum up, did you not move the maximum up also?
Not at the same level. What the adjustment was made was on the minimum, and then they expanded the maximum. Before it had been at like a 46% range spread, and they expanded it to 50%. So it increased it even more. I mean, they didn't adjust the maximum per se, they moved the range. And so that expanded the maximum out. The minimum was adjusted by initially the lowest minimum was adjusted by 3.35%, and then they put a 5% increase between each pay grade. So what that did was they expanded the pay range then by 50%, and the midpoint would be moved out more because it's actually the midpoint between that 50% spread. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Can you talk about the compression a little bit, please?
I'm going to
Okay.
in just a
Thank you
little
so
bit.
much.
I see how this works now.
You're good to go. Keep going.
One of the questions that I had been asked somewhat regularly was, did the Evergreen study make any difference? And the first year I was here, I didn't have enough data to answer that question. And I've been here now for about a year, almost 2 years. And now we have some data. So that's what this chart is showing. This is showing, to read it, you're reading, like, starting at the beginning with 2012, this is showing the job titles that had the largest number of employees who terminated and the associated turnover percentage. So it's not the highest amount of turnover because that's based on how many employees are in a group. If there's just 2 employees and 1 leaves, that's a 50% turnover. So the first one is the case manager 2. They had 47 people who left, and that was the highest number for 2012, and that was a 35% turnover. The next highest was correction workers at 45 employees leaving. Case manager 3 was next with 16, paramedic with 14, and you can see the rest of those. In 2013, the highest position that had people who left were corrections workers at 43, followed by detention deputies at 37, case managers at 36, and you can read the rest of it. Then we did the Evergreen study adjustments. We increased the pay grade where the corrections workers were by 10.3%, the detention deputies by 13.1%, case manager 2 by 10.3%, and you can see the rest of it. So those were the increases that impacted those job titles. And then the next year, at the end of 2014, after those pay increases were put in place, detention deputies had 38 people leave, case managers 2 had 37, correction workers had 32, and you can read the rest of it. And then 2015, it's the same scenario where you have the first list is the one who had the highest number of employees who left, and then it trails down from there. So as you look through it, you can see it didn't make a significant difference. And then I also showed in the first 10 weeks of 2016 the top positions that are leaving.
It's interesting, on 2012, the detention deputies isn't listed there. So that was actually, it wasn't a problem in 2012.
Well, these are the
much as
top
it is.
7. They could have been number 8 or 9.
So anyway, so the number, if I was trying to analyze this chart, I'm not sure what thoughts might be the appropriate thoughts, but so I'm looking at detention deputies as an example. Not
Yes,
listed
sir.
in 2012. 13 there was 37, and 14 was 38. 15 there was 45.
Correct.
And that Evergreen study was right between 13 and 14. So
Correct. And they received a 13.1% increase.
yeah. So okay. So if I was looking at other, case manager 2 is a good example. There was 47 and 12, 36 and 13. Received a 10.3% increase, and then 37 in 14 and 38 and 15. So yeah, I would say by that, it doesn't look like that's necessarily the reason that.
Well, that's one way of saying it. The other thing to keep in mind is when we did the Evergreen study, their recommendation was a 6.7% increase. And due to budgetary constraints, we were only able to implement half of that. So we implemented the 3.35. So I would suggest that the amount that we were able to implement did not make a difference for those positions.
So again, so back to the case manager 2, it says 10.3% increase. So that's, so it was 3.5%.
That was the,
equal, but-
that was the increase that the minimum went to.
Okay.
But that particular pay grade, that particular area got a 10.3% because they made all kinds of adjustments when they crosswalked the positions in to make these adjustments for the ones that were significantly below market. And then they crosswalked them into the pay structure the way it was. So these were adjustments in conjunction with the pay structure changes.
Okay. That's a good chart. We'll have to look at this one a little bit longer, but thank you for that.
Understood. The other recommendations that the Evergreen study gave, along with that 6.7% increase, and we were able to budget 3.35 to it, was to annually take a look at our peer group from the Evergreen study to see if they made any market adjustments to their pay plan. So we did that in January and February, and what we found was we sent out a request and we got a 60% response rate from the same peer group. And 38% of those companies, those organizations, and they're all counties and cities, they made market adjustments to their pay plan since 2013 on average of 3.24%. They also, 70% of them in 2014 provided pay increases, and the bulk of those being COLAs and merits. 46% of them provided COLAs with an average increase of 1.45%, and 54% used merit increases with an average increase of 2.59%. In 2015, 85% of them provided pay increases, and you'll see that both COLAs and merits were the top used, and we had companies that used both. We had organizations that used both, COLAs and merits. The COLAs averaged 2.6 and the merits averaged 2.17. That's why 54% of each, so that's why it's more. So they made changes to their pay plan, and those were the average increases that they provided. And that was the feedback we got from our peer group.
Let me just verify a number on your chart here. You said 0.08% use a step increase of 2.5. That's a very small number.
Correct.
0.08.
Very few people use step increases anymore.
All right. Thank you.
Back in October, we participated in a survey with Johnson County, and they provided us their results while we were in the middle of all this, so I thought it would be interesting to include this information as well, because we did participate with them on it. They had 16 local governments, and on average, those market adjustments to their pay plan were 2.3%. Their market adjustment projected for 2016 this year are 1.6%, and the average pay increases, the budget for that study was 2.6%, and they're projecting the same for this year. The type of pay increases that they had for 2015 are listed there below, the top, of course, being merit increases, promotions, and market adjustments, and then COLAs. So that's just the information from the Johnson County study.
Just a
yes,
question,
sir.
if I can jump in.
Sure.
Do you know if Sedgwick County was included as one of the,
Yes, we were.
entities that they studied?
Yes.
Do you know if any other local governments in kind of the South Central area were included in that too?
Tulsa County.
City of Wichita?
No,
Huh. Okay.
I found that interesting too. No.
Okay.
Now, they may have asked them, but they didn't participate.
Any other counties besides Johnson County?
Yes, there was Cobb County, Georgia.
I mean in Kansas.
In
Anything else?
Kansas. Well, there was, let's see, City of Overland Park, Olathe, Johnson County, Kansas. They used their area that they see as their competition and their market data. We're included in that. Tulsa's included in that. Douglas County, Nebraska, Omaha's included in that. St. Louis is included in that.
I'm curious
for them.
because from their side, I would have thought that the counties that were adjacent Wyandotte County, Douglas, maybe even Shawnee in Kansas would be ones I would think they would include. Of course, that would be the cities of Kansas City, Kansas,
Right.
Lawrence, and Topeka. And, of course, the one that's closest to them, obviously, is Kansas City, Missouri, and Jackson County.
Kansas City, Missouri was in there.
Was in there.
Yes.
But none of the others were?
They may have been invited, but they didn't.
They didn't participate.
Provide
Yeah, they
data.
didn't provide data.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other way to compare the economy of Johnson County with Sedgwick County in terms of cost of living, housing cost, average wages?
Yes.
Okay, so
I have information in a little bit.
All right, that's great. We'll get to that
Okay.
eventually. Thank you.
Uh-huh. The other recommendation, another recommendation from Evergreen was that we conduct a mini survey on a biannual basis. And so we did that this year. When we sent out the other survey, we sent a second survey asking them to give us their information on 28 of the positions that we regard in our top tier and who are at high risk. And we define high risk as having high turnover, below market, and having a large number of employees. And those would be a lot of those positions that you saw on that chart. So we sent out information requesting our competitors and the peer group from the Evergreen study to provide us data on how they're paying their people now. And what we found was, and using the cost of living index to compare it so that we would reduce it from Johnson County as they provided us information and increase it from some of the smaller counties around here. We tried to make sure that we could include that in it. It was a 7.4%. We are 7.4% below the market minimum, 3.1% below the market midpoint, and 1.5% in the market maximum. And that doesn't surprise me because we expanded our pay range, so that's why we would be better on the far end. But of course, it's not really the far end that we have a problem with. It's the minimum. That's where we have a problem. And I think it's indicative of some of the things that we're seeing. Now, we did not include, well, one of the three of the positions that we looked at were detention deputy, detention sergeant, and sheriff deputy. We did not include the Johnson County data for the detention positions because they have commissioned officers and we don't. But everything else we looked at and we put in the cost of living adjustment. But those two positions, they're not comparable, so we didn't include it.
Let me ask a question on this chart. So on average, 7.4% below the market minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean?
Entry level. Let me.
Okay.
Boom, boom, boom. The minimum. You see that 14 point? That's the entry level. That's where we bring everyone in at.
Okay, I guess my point is you think you'd be closer to the minimum and farther from the maximum. And it seems like the chart is describing that reversed the way I would see it. I'm going to make a guess here. We're 1.5% below the market minimum and 7.4% below the market maximum. No, I'm okay. You need.
Again, when you look at the pay range, you've got the minimum, which is the entry point at 80%, if you will, of what we call comp ratio, which I'll get to in just a moment. And then the midpoint, which is 100% market. That's where you should be fully knowledgeable of your job and paid at market. You know, at value. And then there's the maximum, which is 120%. And where we have our problem is at the entry level rate. That's and that would be true. We have our highest turnover in the first 2 years, and I'll get to that in a moment. But we have our highest turnover. We have our biggest challenge of keeping people in the first 2 years. And I would suggest it's because a lot of times people need a job. So they get a job, and then they get a better offer, and then they go.
I understand all that. I'm just trying to understand your percentages and your minimum and maximum comments there relevant to that previous chart you showed me. So 7.4% below the market minimum. Can you go back to the previous chart that shows that scale?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we're 7.4% below the market
Right.
maximum. I'm sorry, minimum.
Correct. Minimum.
Okay, so can you, if I subtract this 7% from 14,
That would be, now keep in mind, that's on average. Of all the positions that we surveyed, we took the average of the difference between where we were and the minimums for everyone else in the survey. And that gave us this amount on average that were 7.1% below minimum. In some of the cases, we may have been right on. Some of the cases, we may pay better. But on average, it's 7.1% below minimum of everyone else who participated in the survey. In some of the cases, we're very far off.
Okay. I think I'll spend some time on this one later. I'll let this one go for now, but
Okay.
it's not quite.
And
Maybe
it may
I'm
make,
alone in my comments, or sometimes you speak up and you look stupid, so I don't want to.
No, you don't
I don't
look
want to be that
stupid.
way, but
No.
again, I'm trying to understand that those comments relevant to that scale, and
and I think it'll make more sense as we go through.
Okay.
Well,
Yes, sir.
does that just another way of saying that then, that at the entry level, other our peer groups are paying on average $1 more an hour?
Correct. And that's why you do a market survey, and that's why you should do it regularly, because you need to see how competitive you are to where you're looking for people and where people are taking your people.
But are people leaving to go to these other areas?
When people leave, we don't necessarily know. We don't ask, where are you going? I'm sure some of the department heads and elected officials have an idea of where their employees go to, whether it's private or public. But I'll get to some more of that turnover in just a minute. But I don't have that answer.
Well, but you're saying we need to compare ourselves to these entities because this is where we're losing people to, but we don't know if we are actually losing them to
Well,
them
and
or
even if
somebody
we're
else.
losing them to the private sector, our survey doesn't have any private sector data in it. It's
Right.
just public.
Right.
At the entry level, lower range, I mean if I'm making $14 an hour doing one function, I can get $17 an hour, and it's something completely different. I don't think that makes any difference. I'm going for the $17. And
Unless your heart is in what you're doing at 14. Well, there's that.
okay, well, if
You have to pay your bills.
That's right. But if I'm working for Public Works and making a certain level and doing road work or whatever, but if I can get a job in an office somewhere and make $2 more, it's a totally different thing. But I'll go for the $2. I mean, so I guess my only point is trying to track them after they leave at this level. I don't think is particularly helpful.
And we don't, it's not a question that we ask in the exit interview. But I'll have more data about that in just a moment.
Well, if I could just pipe in here, I'm on the Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics reports, and this is really focused on the 342 largest U.S. counties, in which Sedgwick is one of those. It talks about where we rank in terms of wages. Johnson County was 27th. And then it said, how do you say that? Wyandotte. They were 160th. Sedgwick was 235th out of that. And it further talks about large county average wage changes among the 342 U.S. counties again. Wyandotte recorded, and they were placed 168th. Sedgwick, again, is in the bottom half of the ranking. So, it's comparing large counties to large counties across the U.S., including here in Kansas and neighboring states, kind of what this study, where they recorded. So it's when you're competing with other counties, and I mentioned a couple yesterday to some of the commissioners, and when we have technical experts who we train, and we spend a lot of money investing on training them, where in fact what we're doing is we're training them to potentially go to another county to make more money for the expertise that we've trained them on. I mentioned the one specific, the forensics gun expert that we train. It takes like a year to 3 years of training them. 1 year in the schoolhouse and 3 to actually do the work. and we lost that person to Johnson County because of squarely on salary. And appraisers, the same. And you can go across the board, is that we have to be more competitive in those technical skills, especially in order to compete with some of these larger counties, or else we're just a training ground. We're a university.
Do you know if those rankings are corrected for cost of living index as well? So in other words, Johnson County has a higher cost of living, but so are those rankings taking that into account? The Midwest, this part of the South Central Kansas has a much different economy than Johnson County has. In fact, I would say Kansas has a different economy than the East Coast and West Coast have. So it's important that these are adjusted, I think, for a good comparison.
Well, I mean, but is it really? Because you're trying to exclude this county and keep it in its own little box, whereas you truly are competing regardless of the cost of living or regardless of the municipality or where they're living. You're still competing with those. If they see the opportunity and in their analysis go to Kansas City, Missouri and make a higher salary, then that's up the road. That's still within the geographical area. And they're going to do that.
I think the point is that the other parts of life, the quality of life, the size of home that you can afford, the things you can do because money goes a certain distance, is different there. Because if everything costs more to live there, then you might actually have less quality of life, even though you might have a higher salary. Because it is, to me, it's a relevant point, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just seeing this differently, but I guess from my perspective, having a cost of living index correction or adjustment to me is important. And again, I just wanted to ask the question of whether there's any type of correction in that data.
Well, you can go to the website, and it has a lot of footnotes, but
all right.
I don't want to spend the time.
Would you just mind? I would like you to please send us a link to that. That'd be great.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. And Commissioner Peterjohn?
Yes, if I could follow up a little bit, of the 342 counties, besides Johnson, Wyandotte, and Sedgwick, were any other Kansas counties included in that study offhand, Mr. Manager?
Offhand, I can't tell you that.
Okay. I was curious if they were.
They specifically mentioned the two Kansas counties in here as being large counties. So if you weren't in that pool, there would be very few others in this county or in this state that would probably be ranked in that 300.
The reason I was thinking if you included Wyandotte, I think Shawnee County is roughly about the same size, and Douglas.
Shawnee was mentioned in here, and they were in the bottom half of the ranking as well.
And Douglas wouldn't be too far behind in terms of population. In terms of the broader question, in terms of folks leaving here to go to, actually moving, I think our competition might be more a challenge in terms of municipalities, if there's comparable positions across the street or the state of Kansas, or frankly, if you could continue to live in your current residence here and maybe get a position in a neighboring county. And I've known of plenty of cases of people who, are driving 20 to 40 miles a day one way as part of their commute into other positions. So when we look at the comparability, it's a useful tool, but I would focus. I mean, I know there are some positions, like for instance, the city of Wichita. They've got police, fire, and roads just like we do, and the state's got. They're doing public safety and they're doing roads also. So that's kind of a in terms of the comparability. But I would certainly be interested in that link, Mr. Manager. So I'll look forward to being able to take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay.
One of the things that was interesting in our cost of living index is that the state of Kansas is on par with Sedgwick County.
Well, and the thing is, the advantage Sedgwick County has, and one of our, I think, underutilized marketing tool is the cost of living here is below the national average, and housing costs are very reasonable compared to particularly certain coastal areas in this country. But housing isn't everything.
And this one particular site I have also has all the counties in Kansas on a table, and listed in there is the employment record as well as the average weekly wage in those counties. So.
You mentioned, Eileen, that Kansas is on par with Sedgwick County. What do you mean by that comment?
And that it's the same cost of living. We're at when we look at it, we're at 100. Our point is 100, and there's ones that communities that would be a higher cost of living, like Johnson County, and then the state, according to the records that we had, the state is at the same par as us. Just
We're at the midpoint, basically.
no, sir. No, it's just the way you have to relate it to yourself.
Okay.
You know, our cost of living, and then comparing the other ones to us.
Oh, I see how you. Okay, I see what
Yeah.
you mean. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you. Please continue.
The last recommendation that Evergreen made was that we conduct a comprehensive compensation study every 4 to 6 years, and so that we'll be needing to be doing that in about 2 to 3 years. So some of the challenges that we are finding is that with our small pay-for-performance pay pools, it challenges our ability to significantly differentiate performance. When we had a 4% pay pool, it was much easier to do that. People could actually be getting 5-6%. But with a 1.75, it was a little difficult to differentiate performance in a significant way. We also have no budget for market adjustments to our compensation structure, which is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today, is that we only currently budget for pay-for-performance pools, and we don't have anything set aside to prepare to make any adjustments to our pay structure, and we should be looking at that annually so that we don't get far behind. I think that's what happened when we brought Evergreen in here in 2014, was we were so far behind that we needed to get caught up. It would be to our advantage and our benefit to make sure that we try to be mindful of that. We also don't budget for experienced hires. The way our policy reads now is that we bring people in at minimum. And if you want to pay them more than minimum, then you have to get approval from the manager of up to 10% above minimum. And if you want more than 10%, then you have to go to the board and ask for more than 10%. What we do, and the situation is, if you've got the salary savings, then you can request it and it's no impact to the budget. But there comes a time once a year when budget takes a look at all of the positions and they do a snapshot. And if the position is vacant, then they take that position to minimum. So any monies that were there from the person who left before are gone. And you lose your ability to be able to pay an experienced person to replace the person who left. And so that's one of the challenges that I think that we have. We also have this culture clash of the tenure or the entitlement mentality, meaning, hey, I've been here for 15 years, and that's what matters, is how long I've been here. That's what matters. Versus the performance mindset, which is you've got stellar performers who should be getting higher raises than people who aren't. And people who are used to a tenured situation expect to be paid more just because they've been here longer. So we have that clash at times when it comes to paying people. And now talking about the issue of compression, our small pay pools do not allow for timely progression through a pay grade, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. As our pay pools are so small and people are moving up just a little bit at a time, it creates bunching and compression. We also have compression when we do bring in experienced hires at a higher salary, and it creates an internal equity problem because these other people are down so low. But when we bring in someone who are being paid what they should be paid for the market, it has an adverse effect for the people who are paid less than them, who've been here longer and who have the same skill set. That's a challenge that we have. There are some other approaches that you can take to compression, meaning if you have this hot skill right now that you need to fill, you could provide just a premium pay that would be temporary and reversible if that hot skill went away. It's not one that we would use. It's just an option that There are some places that do that, mainly in the private sector, but it is an option to compression. Now, I wanted to explain, this is a little bit more talking about a pay plan structure. The whole concept of a pay plan is to help someone move through their career. Typically, what you would do is you would bring someone in at an entry level because they have the minimum qualifications for the job, and that's a right fit. That's the right thing to do. And they meet some of the responsibilities, they understand, they bring their skill sets, but they're learning the job. And then through a period of time, for about 4 or 5, 6 years, they move and they develop those skills and they move closer to market. When you're at market, at midpoint, that's when you're at the full value of that job. That's where if you left, you could go get paid at market for your years of experience and abilities. You've got your full skill set, you've mastered the job responsibilities, and what we, as I said earlier, some of the challenges we have is that we have experienced people who leave or retire, whatever reason they leave, and then we need that same skill set, but we don't have the budget and we don't have the opportunity to refill that position. We have to start back at the beginning, or if the person will take less money, then we bring them in at a lower pay, which does not incentivize someone to feel valued. So that's part of that challenge that we've got with our current pay structure. And then at premium, that's at that maximum point, 120%. This is where you have the full set. You have intellectual knowledge. You understand how everything works. You're the person people go to. You are exceeding the job expectations because you've been doing it for a long time and you have it mastered. This is when people would be at the verge of promotion, and this is also where people are red circled. When you talk about someone who is red circled in the pay grade, that means that they have reached 120% of market. And so their position no longer has more value. And that's one of the things that's very important to understand, is that jobs have market value. And that's what this is talking about. There's the entry-level value, there's the midpoint value, which is at full value, or at market value, and then there's the maximum, which means after that point, that job isn't worth more. And that's where that tenure and performance mindset clash comes in a bit as well. People get red circled after they've reached 120% of their pay grade. They're going to keep being here, they're going to keep working here, but that doesn't mean their job is worth more just because they're here longer. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the things that we did was we did a comp ratio to tenure analysis, looking at the issue of compression and pay range progression. Now, when I talk about pay range progression, this chart right here is an example of what I mean when I talk about pay range progression. You'll see the tenure on the y-axis going from 0 to 3 years, 4 to 6, 7 to 10, up to 25 plus, right? And you see the comp ratio at the bottom. What I did was we took a look at all the pay grades and we did this analysis to determine if you used a 2% progression per year, and moving through, you don't get a promotion, you stay in the same pay grade, and you move through your job grade, it would take 21 years to reach maximum. That's what these green boxes are. And the red circles are, as I said, once you get 120%, you red circle people. So when you're looking at this, this is just an example of grade 120. The little blue dots are people who are in that grade. So the people who are in the green dots boxes mean that they're progressing as we would expect, and everyone before the green boxes are behind the progression. And there's a quadrant. You'll see the other lines, the blue lines or green lines. Those are quadrants of movement expectation. So when you see blue dots in the quadrant before the box, that means those are people who are behind the progression. They're not progressing as they should. And the blue dots that are before the green box, that means that they're progressing more rapidly. Perhaps they were brought in at a higher rate. Perhaps they were a high performer and they're moving faster through the grade. But as you'll see, there's a large grouping of people who are not progressing through the pay grade at an appropriate rate. And they're not all it's not that they're underperformers. It's because we've had small pay pools, we've had the freezes, we've had issues like that. And the data, 20% of our employees are below the expected progression, which means they're outside of the green box. 14% are in the green box. 39% fall below the expected progression, which is that first quadrant before the green box. And 21% are above the expected progression. That means ahead of the green box. And then 6% are at minimum. So I wanted to explain that progression. I'll go back to this box.
Go back.
Yes, sir.
You said some of that, is it related to pay for performance?
Some of it could be. I mean, there could be, and
I mean, if it wasn't, you would expect them to all advance at the same rate and be bunched together.
right. If we were at this step, everybody would just be moving along at the same point. There are some differentiation is because of pay for performance. Yes. Let me go back to this chart. This is giving an example of going back to the minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum. 74% of our employees are below market, which means they're between 80 and 100%. We would expect that in the years that are white on this chart, the years of employees who are here less than 4 years, we would expect that because they would be coming in at the entry level. And then you start moving up to 4 to 6 years, and 7 to 10, you would expect those people to be moving closer to that 100% market rate. Where the concern is in the yellow. We've got employees from 11 years to over 25 years of experience that haven't hit midpoint yet. And that's a concern. That's a risk factor. 20% of our employees are at market, and that means that they're at 100 full market or market value to 120%, which is maxing out of their job, and that's where you want people in the white to be. People who have been here 7 to 20 years. That's what you would expect. You would expect them to be in that rate. It's the folks who are in the yellow that are of a concern. Now, the people who started out close to market means that they may have been hired at their experience level, and that's not a bad thing. It's the ones who have been here for 21 years or more who have not hit the maximum amount yet that could be problematic. There could be reasons for that. Some folks, maybe they took a new job, and so they're at the minimum because the promotion that they got took them to minimum. And so they might be over here in that 74%, or they may have had a demotion that moved them back. So there are a couple of many explanations, but it's the bigger picture that is the issue. We've got people who are not progressing through as we would expect. That's what I wanted you to understand in this chart, and I wanted you to see what I was talking about with the green boxes and all of that in this chart.
Eileen,
yes.
if I could ask you on chart on page 23, this is strictly talking for this one position, grade 120.
Yes.
If we were looking at all the different grades that we have in our employment category, is this pretty typical, or is each one of them going to be quite unique and different, and you really have to look at them at a case-by-case basis, or can you generalize at all?
The generalization is under this actual data. If you looked at this chart, just using it as an example, 20% of our employees are before the green box. 14% of our employees are in the green box. 39% of our employees are 2 quadrants away from the green box. 21 are after the green box, before more than expected progression.
Just for clarity, when you say green box, it's the 0.9 and the 0.9 and 1.08 lines, the vertical lines on the chart. That's the window.
Those are the compa ratio amounts that if someone got 2% per year, except for the first year they wouldn't get that, but if they got 2% per year as they moved up 0 through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 10, as they would get 2% increase a year, this would be what you would expect to see the green boxes, is people's progression. And that's what that looks like. And that's why it gets cut off at 1.2, because that's where we red circle people, because they have reached the maximum of the market value of the job.
Okay, thank you.
And this, of course, contributes to our challenges of our ability to recruit and retain, because if the starting pay is significantly lower than the market would offer, then we lose out when we're trying to fill a job, and our retention is affected. Some of the metrics that we look at are offers made to offers accepted, and we just started doing these metrics last year, so we don't have solid year's data on it. But what we're finding, and this is of course an obvious, is that in the higher skilled jobs we have a difficulty. That would be legal, HR, IT, the MABCD inspectors, our clinical workers in CommCare. Those are the areas where we have challenge with being able to pay people to get them to come. The time to fill is another thing, another metric that is an indicator. It lets you know how difficult it is to find people who are willing to come. And we started tracking it, and so we have data from June through December of last year. 61% of the positions took longer than 30 days to fill. And then our turnover. In 2014, our turnover tenure for employees with less than 2 years was 43%. Of the people who left in 2014, 43% of those people had been here less than 2 years. In 2015, 54% of the people who left had been here less than 2 years.
Do you have data like that for like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? I mean, as they get
Yes,
closer
we
to
could.
vesting, I guess I would expect that number would change.
And I'll show
drastically.
you. I'll show you that. That's in a chart.
Thank you.
It affects our ability to retain if the midpoint maximum is lower than the market. Experienced employees may leave for other opportunities. And for our voluntary turnover, and again, this is not looking at tenure, this is just straight up turnover. In 2014, our voluntary turnover was 13.62%. In 2015, it was 14.4%. And just as because we had this information, the Johnson County survey, the people that they surveyed, their voluntary turnover was 8.7%. When you talk about retention, when it's not about pay, there are other things that you can do to help retain employees, but you do first have to address the pay issue, because that is the number one thing as far as people have to be able to pay their bills and afford their life. But you can do flex time, compressed work weeks, other things that provide them value to retain them, but pay is very important. This is the chart I was talking about, Chairman. We have a metrics chart that we keep, and it has, this is just the turnover information. This is for 2014, and what it shows on the far right column is the county totals. The other columns that you see are the departments that report to the manager, but the county totals are over on the far right. We had 478 people who left, and showing that 13.62% voluntary and 1.59% involuntary. We break it out by gender, we break it out by race, we break it out by tenure, showing people who are here less than 2 years, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 20, and then over 21. So as you can see, people who'd been here less than 2 years, 43% of the people who left had been here less than 2 years, and then it drops to 27. The other thing that we are looking at is looking at the talent that we're losing regarding to the performance evaluation tier. We lost 7% of our high performers in 2014. And the other thing that's interesting, and what we provide in this analysis, is a turnover cost estimate. When you look at 478 employees who left, typically and traditionally, companies use 1.5 times people's salary to estimate turnover cost. And if we did that, that turnover cost would have been $24,800,000. We tried to look at something that was much more malleable, much more tangible, and that would be $11.3 million, and that's based on lost productivity, turnover to cover a vacant position, and the lost productivity of people having to train this person. And that came out to $24,000 based on a median income. So we didn't do it on everyone's salary who left. We tried to do it as an average, and it came out to $24,000 per person who would leave. And so we came up with $11.3 million of turnover costs. But again, if you did it as the industry standard of 1.5 times salary, it would be almost $25 million.
One thing that's not on this chart that I think would be helpful is, for example, if you look at the finance column, there was
Yes.
2 folks that left between 11 and 20 years. If they retired, would they still be on this chart?
Yes.
Do we know if they retired or they just quit? Do we know?
We do know.
Okay.
We do know. And in 2014, we had 36 people who retired. And in 2015, 65 people retired.
But those are in these numbers
Correct.
as well.
They are.
Okay. So it'd be nice to see this chart with those retirements subtracted out, because I think that's skewing the data. We're trying to find out ways to correct and retain employees. I think that's the whole point of this presentation. But if someone's making a choice to retire, I don't know that there's anything we can do necessarily to change their mind.
In some cases, that's true.
Yeah.
And I understand your point. I would suggest that the retirements aren't very large, but we can definitely give you that information.
It would be nice to see that, this chart, if you could repeat this chart with the retirements subtracted, it would be very helpful.
Okay?
And then I guess also really only 2 of these columns actually have a significant number of employees. Those are the columns that have the more interesting data, but
Right.
the 4 columns in the middle there are such small numbers that
Correct.
they're not very useful
Correct.
to make any type of
Right, and
conclusions here.
this is mainly it's that far column, but I thought it was important to try to show what we're reporting for our matrix, our metrics.
Can you bring some other, again, I'd like this chart again without the retirements, but can you bring some other columns on, maybe show us other areas like public safety employees would be?
That is in there. Public safety is under the assistant county manager.
Okay.
There's a drill down for that.
All right. So
The other electeds are in there, but I didn't show those because in giving them to the manager, I wouldn't, we would give elected officials information, so.
Okay, so this summarized into these columns, is there anything that's missing that would be a large number of employees we could add some analysis or add some more information?
We certainly can give you the drill down and the detailed information for public safety.
Okay. All right, thank you. Commissioner Peter John?
Yes, the retirement number was quite interesting because that may be a factor that we can't control, and the fact that you've got almost a doubling between 2015
Yes.
above the 2014 level. Can you attribute that to anything in particular, or that seems rather...
Capers,
Okay.
Capers legislation.
That's the answer I expected
Yes.
you to give me, because, and I don't think it specifically changes that Capers actually made. It was projected that they might make.
right, the changes that they were going to make to the final average salary calculation. That was the thing that precipitated a lot of people's decision to leave while things were the same.
Before it might be changed.
Right, and that's only for the people who were hired before 1993. And that's the same case now. The law's back up, and they're looking at it again. So if they pass the law, the problem is that it will be effective as of July 1, and this is the quandary that everybody was in last year, because they were trying to decide, should we go, should we not, should we go, because they needed to decide that before the end of May.
Well, because if I look at, you've got the 14 and 15 data, which would be, I'd kind of call it post-evergreen in terms of the study. If I looked at
Right.
the retirements at like 12 and 13.
We can
do
give you
have
that
any-
data.
If you
Sure.
could, because I'd be interested to see if it's more like 2014, which I think it probably will be, or maybe some more like 2015. But that's part of that's a significant factor in trying to understand this data. And
The thing that's interesting, though, is 25% of our population is over 55. The majority of our population is under 55. So we don't have, unlike a lot of other governmental agencies, we don't have a high threat of a lot of departures based on retirements. Now, we have key positions, and we have people who have that intellectual capital knowledge that we would be losing, and which is always a risk. But we are a very young organization.
Commissioners, a little more information on what you're asking for the retirement. For me, I see the relevant piece is the 21-plus year retirement. as being, those are probably career folks who are truly probably retiring. Wouldn't you see the 11 to 20-year-old folks, if they retire, they choose to retire, it's an economic, obviously a decision they make, more likely are retiring in order to go on to another job. I mean, you're not going to retire at 11 to 20 years with any kind of substantial amount of retirement salary to do much of anything. So
Well, it
I
depends.
see career folks as being 21 plus.
Some people come here after working other places for a while, and so they still reach retirement age or at age to retire before
Yeah.
they've gotten 20 years. They maybe didn't start.
Yeah. So we won't really, unless we have data on exit interviews of why they're retiring. I don't know if we have.
There's
that.
another cultural thing that has happened as well. I think that younger generations will. I've read some data in some of the classes I've taken in college talking about, for example, my grandfather had a career. He started when he was 16 years old and worked in printing for 60 years. Then he retired. And so today, I think that people typically change jobs every 5 years. It's kind of an average, and she's saying every 2 years. And so there's a cultural thing. People like to do a lot of experiences. They like to travel around the country. They like to do different things, and so there may be cultural reasons as to again,
And
maybe nothing
that's,
we can do about that because it's just a mentality of the workforce today. They're just anxious to try new things and get different experiences, and they're not necessarily committed. And again, also another thing that's happened is especially in the private sector, pensions have totally changed in the last 5 years. And so people don't really have a reason, to stay with the company for a long period of time, like a career, because the pensions are really not part of that equation any longer. So they're more free to travel. A lot of these folks will also contract, and so just to get the resumes are filled with experience. Small amounts of experience, lots of jobs, but the idea of someone working for 30, 40, 50, 60 years at a job, I think those days, for the most part, are gone. Commissioner Ranzau, you've been waiting.
No, I'm good.
Okay, Commissioner Unruh.
Thank you. Eileen, I'm curious about the cost estimate for this turnover. What is factored into our calculation as opposed to an industry standard that's twice as much?
what we did was we took a look at it. We used our median salary and looked at it for a 30-day vacancy and how long that job would be vacant and how much overtime we would have to do to cover the work that would be done by that position and how much additional staffing we would have to use for that. Let me take a look at that. No, 30-day vacancy, 3 months of training. So the additional training where there would be a loss of productivity for people having to train this person on how to do their job. And so there'd be the loss of productivity, the employee leaving, loss of productivity from the supervisor and coworker, the fact that the position was vacant and the work that wasn't being done there, and the cost of overtime and using part-time employees to cover the work that has to be done. So all of that calculation based on a median income of $24,000 or of $43,000 came to a cost of a little over $23,000. And so we rounded it up to $24,000 to use it as a multiplier, just to get a sense of what the cost would be for a vacant position. And that's when we talk about 478 people leaving, multiplying that times $43,000, and that gets us the $11.3 million. And that is so much less. I mean, it's less than half of what the industry standard is, because when they do it, they're looking at the cost of advertising and things like that, and we didn't want to try to put that in there. We were trying to be more realistic and more practical in looking at cost.
Okay. Okay.
The next slide is 2015. It's the same setup where we talk about on the far right column the number of people who left the county. And again, here we're showing 14.4% voluntary with 54% leaving in less than 2 years and having a 5% turnover of the top performers. And our turnover cost estimate is $11.4 million, and if you did the industry standard, it'd be over $29 million.
Can you back this up to 2013 and provide a chart for 13, please?
Sure.
That'd be-
What I understood that you wanted retirement data for 2010, 11, 12, 13, and we'll also provide this far column. We didn't start tracking this data before 2014, so we don't have this breakout, but we can try to get it for you for 2013. I'm just saying we don't have it.
Well, if it's a high level of effort, please let me know. I'm not sure I want to ask for something that's going to cause a lot of cost.
Overtime
I
and- yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to cost a lot of overtime, but it would be useful to see what happened in 13 because of the timing of the Evergreen study,
Sure.
the implementation that was made in 14. So it'd be nice to see how that pay impacted these types of trends.
I think we could more easily get the county totals as opposed to the breakout by the departments, but,
It would be anything you can get would be helpful.
okay.
Commissioner Peter John?
Yeah, you mentioned possibly going back to 2010 for retirement. date.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't being quite that long.
Oh.
I was trying to get pre-Evergreen.
Okay.
And if we're talking about
12 and 13?
12 and 13 would be fine. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Now, regarding the exit interview data, for 2014 and 2015, I wanted to provide the information to you on the main reason people cited when they filled out the exit interview. Now, what we do is when people leave, we send them an email with a link to an online survey. And in 2014, we had a 40% response rate, which is really good for a survey. And of that, they said the main reason they were leaving the county was for a better career opportunity. Second reason was pay, followed by no opportunity for advancement. Their day-to-day dissatisfaction mapped that completely. Their overall satisfaction day-to-day was very good. They liked their relationship with their peers, they liked their job, and they liked the benefits. And we wanted to provide information on the length of service. 45% of the people who responded to the survey had been here for less than 2 years, and 36.9% had been here between 3 and 10 years. Also wanted to provide information on the bachelor's or the education level. Of the people who returned the survey, 44.7% had a bachelor's degree, 29.1% had some college or VOTEC, and 3% had a high school degree or GED. In 2015, we had a 37% response rate, which is still very good. The number one reason why people were leaving was pay, the second one was better opportunity, and the three was they were retiring or relocating. So this is where retirement starts popping into it. Their dissatisfaction day to day was salary, opportunity for advancement, and lack of training or career development.
So when you asked these questions, was this like select your number one reason out of a list that was provided to them, and they checked the box by the one they thought was the most important?
Yes.
How many items were there? Can you show us that?
Sure.
That would,
Yeah, we
it'd be
can-
nice
we
to see
can-
what that looks like. It'd
we
be
can
nice to
get
know how
you-
many out of how many categories were they offered to select from? Is it, was this everything they had?
We will get you a copy of the exit interview so you can see what it says.
Thank you.
And then the areas of satisfaction have to do with the relationship with their peers, the job duties, and the relationship with their supervisor. So they are happy with what they do. They're just not happy with their pay or their opportunities for advancement or development. Their length of service, again, people who provided the information have been here for less than 2 years, 51.5% of them. 30.5% of them had a bachelor's degree, and you can see the rest of that chart.
Back to the middle column here. They say the relationship with peers. Are we saying that they're satisfied?
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
good that that's
Yes.
number one.
Yes, the middle column is what they're happy about.
Okay. Happy. Thank you.
When we talk about, now we're going to start moving in a tad bit about the total rewards aspect, because now we're going to start talking about benefits. And not a lot about benefits, because at the end of April I'll be coming to you with benefits information, but this is just kind of general information. We have a very good cost share with our health insurance now. The county pays 95% and the employee pays 5%. That's very competitive and very good in that regard with our competition. We did an employee satisfaction survey, and we had a 21% response rate when we sent it out to all our employees, and that's pretty good too. 76% of them said they were satisfied with the services they were getting with their health care. The areas where they were dissatisfied was customer service, claims processing, but we are addressing that with United Healthcare. That's the purpose for doing a satisfaction survey, so you can find out what's working and what's not. So we're dealing with that. We also are going to be rolling out our well-being program, expanding that, our consumerism education, and these are things that we're helping our employees in focusing on their personal responsibility and helping provide avenues to deal with chronic health issues. And I'll be talking to you more about that on April 4th. Our paid leave is very good. We do not have a short-term disability plan, but we do have our sick leave plan, which carries on. There's no cutoff of the sick leave, and that's how a lot of people use that for short-term disability. And we have our vacation that you can carry over and you can also sell. So those are some aspects that we have to our benefits.
Pointing to the previous chart, can you I see that the education level does not add up to 100%. There's quite a bit missing.
Oh,
there.
right.
Can you talk about
right.
what's missing?
That will be in that information. And no, these are just the top three. I'd have to go back and I can get that to you.
I'm just curious if they're below high school diploma or above bachelor's. I mean,
I'd somewhere before above bachelor's, yes. But I can get that information.
okay. Thank you.
When we had our retreat, you had asked the question about what is Johnson County doing that we're not doing. And so I provided this chart, and I put the city of Wichita in there because I think that that's probably would be maybe a second question. But regarding health insurance, Johnson County has 3 plans. They do have one with a health savings account with a high deductible. They also have an outcome-based wellness program that provides their employees a reduction in their premium. That's something that they're doing that we're not doing. City of Wichita has 2 plans, but they don't have a health savings account. And as you know, we have 1 plan with no health savings account. The dental insurance, that's the coverage that's different. I wanted to show you there. We're somewhat competitive with Johnson County. We pay 80%, the employee pays 20%, they do 78 and 22. But City of Wichita, the employee pays the full dental. So that was interesting. When I talked about short-term disability a moment ago, I said that we use our sick leave for that process or for that purpose. So does the City of Wichita. But Johnson County, they do have an employer-paid short-term disability program that provides 60% of people's pay. And it's just, that's a standard program that's available for short-term disability. Their tuition reimbursement at Johnson County is $2,500 a year. Ours is max out at $900 a year, and the City of Wichita doesn't provide that. Johnson County provides flex time. They have this core time where people have to be at work, but they can come in early or they can come and stay late, and they coordinate that. So they offer that. City of Wichita doesn't have that, and we don't have any county policy that addresses that. The paid holidays, Johnson County has 9 holidays and 3 personal days. It allows a lot of flexibility for people to be able to celebrate either their own religious holidays or some other event that is special to them. City of Wichita has 10 holidays and 1 personal day, and we have 10 holidays and no personal day. The City of Wichita has a discounted child care center. They provide a 20% discount at La Petite Center. That's one of the things that we're looking in to see where that is and what that is. And then Johnson County provides computer discounts and health club memberships. We have access to the sheriff's office weight room at no cost. So this is just an example of some of the differences. Other than that, there was a lot of similarities.
A couple of things. Can we find out what the average tuition reimbursement is that's actually, because as I understand it, there's a maximum for all the employees that are in the program, and if there's more employees that are involved, then everybody gets a smaller amount because of the larger participation.
Correct.
So it'd be nice to see how many employees are participating and what is the actual benefit rather than what's the maximum, because I'm not sure they ever get to the maximum.
And I would be happy to provide you that information. I had done a issue paper on that last year, and so we have that data. Good.
Thank you so much. And then on the health club memberships, can we find out how many employees are actually utilizing the sheriff's weight room?
Sure.
I have no sense of that at all, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to address just briefly the total rewards concept that we're doing. We've talked a lot about pay. We talked a little bit about benefits. We'll talk more about it next month. But in work environment, I wanted to help you understand the things that we're trying to do to impact the employee experience with the work environment. We are going to be launching in mid-April our supervisory competency certification program, and that is a two-prong approach where we're going to have an evaluation of our supervisors on 9 set competencies that a group worked on a year ago. We've been working on this process about a year, and they are the management competencies that we have here at the county. And so we're putting together an evaluation process for that their direct reports and their supervisor will be evaluating each supervisor on. And then there will also be a curriculum designed to support those competencies to help develop our supervisory staff to be fully competent. The ongoing part of that will be the annual evaluation, making sure that our supervisors are providing a good work environment for our employees based on those competencies. That's the bottom line of that. Last year, we also started developing an employee experience departmental assessment, and that's where we work with the departments to develop a survey to ask the employees what their experience is like, how they feel about things, what's going on in there, what would they like to see improved, what's not working, and then working with those departments to come up with programs that could be helpful to address those issues. So we did that last year. We also are doing the employee experience indicator report by departments, and that is where it's taking those matrix that I was talking about, or those metrics I was talking about, combining them with the new employee orientation surveys, the exit interview surveys, the transfer surveys, putting all of that information together in a report to let the departments know the health of their work environment. And we do that twice a year. And that's just starting. The employee development, again, we go back to the supervisor competency certification program, and that's to help develop the supervisors. And then the next program we're going to be working on is the employee development program, where we're going to be dealing with job-specific skill development, professional growth, professional and public service training, career pathways, and then our tuition reimbursement enhancements with workforce development. So that's the next thing that's coming up. So I'm coming in for a landing now. With our competitive pay structure, it's important that we are competitive so that we can be effective in our recruiting and we can get good candidates. It will help contribute to a reduction in our turnover because people would be able to feel valued in their compensation and in the work that they do. They wouldn't feel that they could go get paid more somewhere else, which is a good thing. We also want to make sure that we have a comparable base salary for a position. That's extremely important. We need to have employees have ample room for growth and opportunity for development. Those are the reasons why you want to have a competitive pay structure. And our pay philosophy, the guidance that we are asking from you, is to help us with understanding where we need to be in regards to the market. How competitive do we want to be? Where do we want our midpoint to be? We need to talk about the importance of budgeting for pay structure adjustments. It's not just like a broken leg. You can't just put a cast on it and it heals and you're done. It's more like allergy shots. You have to continually do this. We also want to make sure that we have budgeting for hiring and promotional moves because this is important in the development of our employees. And looking at our variable compensation, we need guidance on our pay for performance pools and our total compensation plan. So we need guidance on how you would like our philosophy to be, how you'd like our pay structure to look like. And that concludes my presentation.
Commissioner Peter John?
Eileen, and I want and you folks in HR and everyone else who's contributed to that presentation information for it, I appreciate it very much. It's a very helpful and useful overview for me going in. Let me jump back to slide 14 if I could. And it's the areas of concern prior to Evergreen and now slide.
Yes, sir.
I kind of did some quick numbering calculations here on the rung, and one thing that would be a little bit helpful might have been a total position. I understand it's the top 7 positions for each year, but I did a quick calculation for 2012 in the first line and added up all 17 positions. I'm sorry, all 7 positions that were included, and that totaled 153 positions where we had vacancies by my calculation. For 2013, that had increased to 172. and we went ahead and did the evergreen study adjustments, and some of the positions shifted in terms of within where we had the shortages, but for all 7 categories, in 2014, my calculation is we had 173 positions where people left, and in 15, the number was almost identical at 172. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to look at this for the top 3 and see if there's something occurring at the top. Since I can't look at the total, I don't have the total information, but I look at the top 3. And in 2012, the top 3 positions were 108, 116, and 13, 107 in 2014, and 111 in 2015 for the top 3 years. So what surprised me about that was the numbers were so close together to each other for both the top 3 or the top 7. I guess my question to you, and I guess to the manager, in terms of looking at this with the turnover, did Evergreen work?
Do you want my answer?
Sure.
I
I wouldn't have asked it if I didn't.
Well, I understand. I don't think it did. I don't think we did enough. We didn't do enough.
I just would add, it worked. It didn't fix the problem, the total problem. It had an impact. I think the numbers will show that. It slowed the tide. But it did not fix the whole problem because we did not address, I mean, we gave, what was it, 3.5,
3.5.
and the study called for
6.7.
Yeah, so we only did half of what the study called for.
Well, and of course, we've been fighting fiscal challenges the whole time.
Right.
Correct.
During that, too. Well, I raised this because the intent was to try and, with Evergreen, and you're asking about our philosophy, I'll just share you a commissioner's insight. I want to have a competitive environment for county employees, Eileen, where they can feel like they can not only contribute to their community by working for Sedgwick County, but also have a career. And, obviously turnover is one of the important factors, and we've got seemingly a significant variance. If I look at some departments, there's a very significant differences between turnover department by department and often position by position. So to try and, I can make the joke about people drowning in the lake that's on average 18 inches deep. And we've got certain areas where we've got more challenges than others, and where we're at the moment is important to understand, because for everyone who works for Sedgwick County, one of the challenges we've had, in my opinion, is the fact that because of problems that are outside our control, and Capers has been grossly underfunded in the end of the last century and in the first part of this century, and there's been an effort to correct that. And part of that correction has been forcing the employer side, which in this case is Sedgwick County, to provide additional funding. And that's been a factor, I think, during the time I've been on the commission. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and trying to understand the challenges that we have in front of us. And this is very helpful data, and I wanted to get that on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners with comments or questions? I guess for myself, I would like to try to find associated costs with improving some of our benefits that are missing. I mean, I think tuition reimbursement has been one of those things I've talked about a lot, and I think that let me just, on that note, let me say, in the private sector, there are some positions in the private sector that the employees will sign a contract for service. Those benefits are contingent on their continued service for a period of time. Do we know whether or not Johnson County's implemented any type of commitment?
I do not believe they do, but I don't know that for a fact, but I think in my review of it, that's what I remember.
In terms of some of the other stuff that's on there, the child care, the discount computers, the health club membership, I'd like to try to find out what would be the costs if we were trying to implement those ideas again, I think the argument's been made that Johnson County is doing it better, and so looking at their benefit opportunities, they are obviously offering some things we've talked about, but we're not doing. Comparing ourselves with Wichita, we're not drastically different.
No.
But some of these things are really big benefits, but may not actually have a huge cost. I still continue to argue. I think the HSAs is an opportunity that actually, if you're a young, healthy employee, HSAs is going to be very attractive, because this really benefits the employee in a way that our health care insurance costs is, from their perspective, is almost a waste of money, and it's a lot of money. And so if they could somehow manage that more effectively, they can actually personally benefit in a way that's huge. The private sector is moving this direction, and so again, we're trying to compare ourselves with the private sector as well. If you're 25 years old or 30 years old, and you're healthy, and a private employer is offering you an HSA that personally benefits you, it can benefit you, $10,000 a year. That's a huge benefit. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this, but my opinion is we need to engage that idea. And I'm not saying we would mandate to our employees they have to go that way, but I'd like to offer it as an option. And if someone is worried about pre-existing conditions or whatever, I would hate to force them into something they don't want to do. But I think we ought to have this on the table as an option, because it's a tremendous benefit if people want to exercise that. In terms of the tuition reimbursement, for the number of employees that might participate in that, I think it's relatively affordable compared to some of the other pay increase. I think it's about $1 million for 1%, if I remember correctly, of pay for. I guess it really wouldn't matter if it's COLA or STEP or pay for performance. 1% is about $1 million, and so for what maybe would be the equivalent of a 0.5% increase across to all employees, we probably would have a very robust tuition reimbursement program, hopefully. And again, since we do provide funding to Wichita State University and WATC, I still would like to see if there's a way we can work out some type of an agreement with them. We're already providing a lot of money. Why can't we designate some of that as scholarship dollars, for example? To me, there ought to be a way for us to leverage what we're providing to those schools as a benefit to our employees. Some of these other things I don't think are hugely expensive to us, but there are things we can do that are much. Again, the flex time. I think I see why that's attractive. It's really important to employees to be able to manage their personal lives. Again, they're busy. They some of them they would really highly value that, and I just think that there's almost no cost to us. It's just a management issue. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on slide number 30, and if you really want to impact retention and reduce attrition, I think there's biggest bang for the buck is on slide 30, in my opinion. Let me see. Any other questions here? Commissioner Norton.
Well, I think we're going to continue to have to balance tangibles against intangibles. I think that's where we're going to have to look at this. Obviously, on the tangible side is wages and compensation. We've had a compression for many years. When we started looking at pay for performance, we anticipated that we would have a pay pool of at least about 4%, where you could have a range of a high performer with a 6 or 7% increase, which moves them through the system a little faster, gets it spread out, and a marginal performer doesn't get anything and maybe has to be on an improvement plan, or we move them along. We don't let them stay in the organization just because. And we're going to have to look at that. Now, I know we've talked about our physical restraints and everything, but if we really believe in an organization that's heavily weighted with employees and payroll, which is a huge part of our budgeting process, huge, there's got to be an investment, or you're going to continue to see numbers like this for a long time. I mean, I came out of an organization where we lived and died by these kind of comparisons every day in the marketplace, because we competed for the same people in that pool. And I think it's no different here in the public sector, but we also have the private side we have to look at. and we're losing people to the private side. They're going to, IT guys are going to IT companies. I mean, we're losing to those kind of industries. We have to be ready for that, and it's only going to get worse as the millennials move through the pipeline, and now the Gen Zs or whatever the next iteration is are moving in there. And we're going to have to be very smart about it. Intangibles are important. You know, how we treat our employees, the policies that we make, how we understand the value of the employees becomes very critical. I mean, if you look at the numbers there, what was it? 85% of the people have college degrees. We're dealing with a highly respected, educated workforce. I mean, that we don't replace very easily. I mean, you don't go out and very easily get somebody with a high school education and say you're going to put them in most of the jobs that we're hiring for. So we're going to have to be sure that we watch this closely. One of the difficulties is that we went after the Evergreen study. I think they made pretty good recommendations, and then we shortchanged it. And it just did not change the dynamic of what we were trying to solve. It put a little bit of a Band-Aid on it, but it didn't get us there. So the decision will be, are we going to be serious about compensation? Because there is tangible compensation and there is intangible. And I agree with Commissioner Howell. Sometimes intangible is important. But I got to tell you, most people I know work because of the salary first. And then the icing on the cake is I enjoy my job, I find value, I want to be there, I wake up every day wanting to make a difference. Now, there may be a point in your life where it switches, and you don't necessarily need the salary as much as you want to be doing something of value. That happens. But if you're looking for younger workers, I guarantee you it'll be a balance, and we'll have to really look at that. So this is great information. I think it'll be thought-provoking, but it's really going to boil down to taking a hard look at filling the gap of the Evergreen study and really looking at pay-per performance, which I think is a great model. If you talk about moving towards a more of a business community model as opposed to steps and all of that, we did that, but we have never funded it like we should have to really reward and take care of our employee base. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Unruh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eileen, will you or the manager be bringing us a recommendation before we get into budget discussions so that we can, I mean, it's a huge impact on our budget, actually one way or the other. I mean, if the number's correct that it costs us $11 million a year for turnover, then that's, we need to invest in reducing that. So, but I would, with everything else that goes on in budget, I'd like to have the recommendation in advance of that so that we can wrestle it out before we get to that point.
Commissioner Peter John?
I've got a question for finance. Last year we found out from the state, I think it was July 30th or 31st, it was right at the end of the month, how much we were going to have to change the contribution to KPERS and KP&F for our employees for the 2016 year. Are we still would we anticipate getting that information from KPERS at roughly that same time and this year as we did last year?
I believe we already have it.
We actually don't know yet what those rates are, but we have heard from Alan Conroy, who's the director of KPERS, that he expects those rates to be relatively flat. And so what we have currently planned for in the requested budget that you'll see during your hearings is an increase of about 0.5% in the rates. So we would go from 10.18% for KPERS to about 10.43%
Okay.
in KPERS for next year.
Well, I mean, that's a big driver on the contribution end, so I was a factor. I'm glad to hear that we'll have that in front of us as opposed to getting it at the last minute just before we have to approve the budget. That's good news. Thank you.
One more question. Can you please add to slide 30, I guess, a comparison of retirement for Wichita? Is Wichita They're not our capers, are they?
No, they're their own plan.
They have their own program. Can we understand that a little bit better and find out what that looks like? Because
Sure.
again, they're our biggest competitor, I think, for skilled workforce. I think, as Commissioner Peterjohn pointed out, somebody might stay in the same home and everything stays the same, but just changing to the next, changing to the city of Wichita might change the salary and benefits significantly. So that's a pretty major part of what they offer. I'd like to understand what they do on that. So
I'd like to understand how they can end up on their own retirement plan if that's an option for us.
That'll take a little more digging, but
Yeah, I understand.
Commissioner, one final comment in kind of summary. Never underestimate the return on investment you get from a public servant's heart. Being the new guy here in this county and working public service really my whole life, as I walk the halls around here and I go to the different departments, and what I hope you'll see and what I plan to bring you during the budget cycle is to show you how much you're saving by guys on the ground, guys and gals who are just taking the initiative and doing things above and beyond at a cost savings to the county. EMS, computer programs, the way they track, the way they do maintenance has saved millions of dollars. Mark at Parks and Recreation, who is using everything he can outside of what he's given in order to make things happen. Look at the facilities maintenance team here and what they've done in efficiencies in just this building and the money you have saved by just what they do, because they see it, they love what they do, they get after it, and they make it happen. Time and time again, I run across this, and that is millions of dollars of savings to this county. And I know you know this, and I know you know how great the employees are. When we get to the strategic planning, I want to make them a goal. The employees are everything. The public servant is everything to this community because it's about community service. But the return on investment you're getting from that by just the interest you're showing here is awesome, and it transcends across the organization. And you need to understand that. I know you do, but I wanted to say it just because I've seen it. And I want to bring you those examples as we get into the budget process.
thank you, Manager. I guess as we wrap up here, I'd like to just extend my thanks to the HR folks, especially you, for all your work in getting this data together.
It's my pleasure.
It was a good presentation. I think we've had a good well-spent time this morning trying to dig in to understand where we can do better. And as I think to Commissioner Unruh's question, I'm thinking about that. I think, again, some of these intangibles have a cost. I'd like to understand that as well as possible. Some of these things are fairly difficult and complex to implement. I understand that, but if we have a goal of implementing these and we're driving in that direction, if we could estimate the cost of that, it would be very helpful when we do our budget discussions in terms of employee enhancements. And in terms of other aspects of pay, I guess I think we understand the cost of each percent of increase, but do we need to treat certain skill codes differently because of the high attrition and have some adjustments in the salary structure for certain skill sets because of the high attrition? We just recognize a course corrections needed I guess my opinion is, in terms of pay philosophy, if we've got a continuing problem on some of these areas where we're confident that pay is the issue, and we need to make adjustments to some department positions because of that, I think, and treat them specially. I think that's the point I think I'm taking away from this is we ought to have that data as a recommendation. But in terms of percent of pay for performance or COLA or whatever those things are, I think we just need to have those options laid out and let us see what we can afford in terms of the other budget pressures we're going to have. So I don't know that we can. I'm not sure it would be reasonable to expect a recommendation necessarily on a percent increase in salary necessarily, but I would like to see a recommendation in terms of what structure changes need to be made for certain positions in certain departments. I think that's where I would like to see personally, and then options connected to costs, and see what we can try to determine what has the greatest impact on fixing some of the attrition issues, increasing retention. Some of the things, again, if it's a thing like flex time, for example, and that's important to people, then that may not be any cost at all to us to do that. HSAs, I'm not sure will actually cost us any money. In fact, I think it might save the county money and be something that the employees would actually like. If they understand it, I think they may choose it because it benefits them and benefits us. And that might free up some salary for other enhancements. And so, I guess I would like to see a cost versus options, recommendations, and what areas we need to pay attention to specifically to fix those positions, and then I'd like to see some options of across the board type salary options for us to look at, but not necessarily a recommendation there. In other words, I'd like to see the options that would be available to us to consider, but not necessarily a recommendation.
Okay.
Manager, you gave me kind of a funny look there. Am I not being clear?
If she has it, I'm
Okay.
good.
It was a long run-on sentence. I could say it again.
She's sharper than I am.
All right. Well, again, so as we go into the budget cycle, I think we need to understand our budget fairly deep before we can make any decisions in terms of what we do in terms of salary and benefits. I think we have to understand the rest of our budget as well. So.
And again, next month, at about the same time, we'll be coming in front of you about benefits. So,
Thank you so much. And see no further comments, Manager. Anything else for us today? All right. Well, I guess we will call this one done. Thank you so much for being here.